Good evening and welcome to My Child in CogAT, a presentation for families and caregivers for students who are taking the CogAT assessment in Washington Township. My name is Michelle Smelser, and I am the new district high ability coach for the Metropolitan School District of Washington Township. Thank you for joining us this evening, and let's get started. I'm going to share my screen first here. Again, my name is Michelle Smelser, and I encourage you to write down my email and phone number here in case you would like to contact me after the presentation. If you think of a question that was not answered here, I'm more than happy to get back with you and speak to you at a later time. What is CogAT? CogAT stands for Cognitive Abilities Test. It's a multiple choice test, and it measures the reasoning skills with different types of verbal, quantitative, and nonverbal questions. It's typically administered in a group setting and is commonly given as an entrance exam into each school's high ability program. It is listed by the NAGC, the National Association of Gifted Children, as one of their preferred aptitude tests that are commonly used to identify students across cultural and linguistic backgrounds who might otherwise be overlooked. This means that most of the questions that are on CogAT are not language dependent, so anybody can take the test even if they are speaking another language. Fortunately, we do have access to other languages here in Washington Township, so students who in particular speak Spanish at home or another language will be able to listen to that language on screen when they are testing, as well as hear and see it as they are taking the test. So some specific notes about testing day. We are testing all students in grades kindergarten, second grade, and fifth grade this year for Washington Township. This is so that we can have equal access to the high ability program for all of our students, and it's not dependent upon student nominations or teacher nominations. Every single student will have the opportunity to take the CogAT test and be assessed for the criteria for entry into the high ability program. CogAT itself takes about 90 minutes to complete. Grades 2 and kindergarten are untimed. They can take as long as they need in order to finish the test. Grade 5 has 90 minutes to complete each one of the sections. Typically, it takes a couple of days to finish the test. We're not having your students sit down and complete all of the sections in one sitting. They do get some breaks between each of the subsections so that they can kind of relax for a little bit before they move on for the next area. Kindergarten is going to take 2 of the sections. They are not going to take the nonverbal section. They are just doing the verbal and the quantitative batteries. They are not doing the nonverbal. There are 3 subsections in each one of the test, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment. Grades 2 and 5 are going to take all 3 batteries, and each one of those sections has 3 subsections. So there's a total of 9 tests in all. They will take the nonverbal, the verbal, and the quantitative in grades 2 and 5. Each section takes between 10 and 24 minutes to complete. Remember, grade 2 and kindergarten gets as much time as they need to finish the sections, and grade 5 it is timed, and so they will only have a limited amount of time to finish each part. The teachers might spread your child's test section over a period of a couple of days, and I know that is exactly what we have set up for the scheduling for each of the elementary schools. If you have questions about the schedule, I encourage you to reach out to your building's testing coordinator, who is the assistant principal, and they will be able to share which days in particular they are testing. If your child is absent, of course, they may make up the assessment when they return, and we will make proper consideration for the timing and the placement for where they need to finish the test. CogAT's a little different than your typical test. It's not based on what your child already knows. It's based on analogies and puzzles and being able to see if they can figure out things that they've never seen before. So it's not like an achievement test where they already have this wealth of knowledge in their head and they're being tested on what they have learned so far. Like, for example, when they're taking a math test, they're not being tested on what they've already learned in math class for the last few weeks. This is something different. It's fun, technically, that a lot of the students like taking this test because it's unlike other tests that they may have taken in the past. All right, so a little bit more about ability versus achievements. So the CogAT is an ability test. It predicts the capacity for learning, how they can figure out something that they've never seen before. It predicts their future performance. It's more abstract. And it looks at the patterns and relationships in the world. So some examples of tests that are on ability are the SAT, the ACT, and the CogAT. This is a little different than your achievement test, which is assessing content that they have already learned and known. That would be something that assesses their current performance, how they're performing right now in math, how they're performing right now in language arts. So examples of that would be like the NWEA test that we take, the I Learn, the I Read. That's a different kind of test than what the CogAT is. So why do we administer the CogAT? The CogAT is giving us a norm reference test of the student's ability testing. That means how they can reason abstractly over time compared to other students that are their same age. It lets us look at your child's ability for their capacity for learning over time, and it lets us nurture some potential in our younger learners. It lets us gain perspective on academic potential, and it helps us to identify our early potential in our kindergarten students. Remember, they're only taking the verbal and the quantitative batteries. Our elementary high ability program officially begins in grades 3 through 5. However, we do keep track of our earliest learners in grades 1 and 2 to make sure that we are meeting their needs and providing services for them within the general education classroom. As they are placed into cluster classrooms, we want to make sure that we are meeting their needs and that they are still growing and receiving a rigorous content and education. It also helps us identify students who may benefit from participating in our middle school's honors classes. So those applications will open soon for our grades 7 and 8, 6, 7, and 8. And so we want to make sure that our students who are moving on to middle school next year, this is another data point for us to consider when we are looking at all of the different parts of their portfolio when we're making that big decision on whether or not which type of classes they're going to take in middle school. The CogAT does have 3 batteries. That means there's 3 different kinds of tests. There's a verbal test, and that includes these items over here: picture analogies, picture classification, and sentence completion. There's a nonverbal section of the test, which is figure matrices, paper folding, and figure classification. And then there's a quantitative part of the test, which is more number-based. So it has analogies, puzzles, and a number series. So let's take a look at an example of what a verbal battery would look like. So we have our picture verbal analogies, and the students will see a picture up in the, they'll have 2 pictures on the top and then 1 picture on the bottom. And their job is to figure out how these pictures go together and what's the relationship between these pictures. So we can see that there's a foot and then a shoe. And so your child will think, okay, I know that a shoe goes on a foot. So for the bottom, they need to think something that goes on a hand. And when they look at the choices, we can see that there is a glove over here. And they're going to make the assumption that a glove goes on a hand like a shoe goes on a foot. So those are the types of questions they will ask when we're looking at the analogy. So there's no words, it's just pictures, and they are looking at these items trying to make the best choice. Then we have our sentence completion, which does have a little bit of language involved. So remember, our Spanish speaking learners are going to see this in English. they're going to see it in Spanish. They're going to hear it in English. They're going to hear it in Spanish. That way they have the best chance of being able to answer this question in whichever language they're able to use the best. So this one says, which one swims in the ocean? So we look at a cat, a shark, and a bird. And of course, we know that the shark is swimming in the ocean. And then the questions continue from this point, asking different types. Then finally, the verbal classification, again, is picture-based. And we can see that there are 3 balls on top. And so we're hoping that the student chooses the soccer ball down here on the bottom to finish the selection here. Then we move on to the nonverbal again. So there's no words, it's all based on pictures. We're looking at relationships, how things change, patterns. So we see a big circle, little circle, so a big triangle, little triangle. We've got some paper folding activities here where they're having to visualize in their mind what the paper looks like as it is changing and being folded. And then our figure classification, which has lots of shapes in it. So we see 3 shapes that have been shaded. So we're going to look for the 4th shape that has also been shaded. And then finally, our quantitative section. So we have number analogies. So this looks very similar to the verbal analogies, only this one has more to do with numbers. So we have 1 walnut cut in half into 2 walnuts, 1 apple. So we're looking for the one that is cut in half for 2 apples. The number puzzles will show a picture of a train with some items in it. So this one has 2 tomatoes in it. And then we have the second train over here, and the tomatoes are being split between the 2 different cars. So we have 1 tomato in this car. So we need 1 more tomato in the last car so that there are 2 altogether to equal the other side of the picture. And then finally, for the number series, we're looking for how the beads on the abacus are following a specific pattern, and they get increasingly difficult as they are taking the test. So this one starts with 1 bead, 2 bead, 3 beads, and then it repeats 1 bead, 2 bead, 3 beads. And so the next one should be a 1 bead. All right. So we want to make sure that we are supporting all of our learners with our CogAT results. We use it for more than just high ability placements. We're using it to encourage areas of strength, to provide tools to support areas of need. So if they don't do as well on one section of the CogAT test, we want to know that so that we can make sure that we're providing that support in the classroom for that student as well. It's telling us what kind of interventions a child needs to build up their areas of weakness. And then, of course, it's helping our teachers determine how to differentiate for all of those learners. Now, when we are placing students into a cluster program classroom, we want to make sure that our high ability students are in there. So we might have a cluster of, say, 7 or 8 students who have been identified as high ability. And then we're very intentional with the other students that we are placing in that general education classroom. We want to make sure that they are all similar in ability and that we don't have as broad of a range, because it is going to be important for the teacher to differentiate for all of those students. Differentiation means that they're changing the instruction in some way so that all of the students are meeting their needs and getting a rigorous education. They might differentiate the product, they might differentiate the process, or they could differentiate the content of the curriculum. So one question that we get a lot is, well, how is this different than a regular classroom? Because all teachers differentiate. That's just best practice. We want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of our learners. So some of the things that we do differently in our cluster classrooms as compared to our general education classrooms is a lot of times the pacing is faster, which means the students are learning it more quickly. Our high ability students, they don't need as much repetition as your general education students. So they may only have to go over the content once or twice as compared to a general education student who might have to go over it 6 or 7 times before they have completely mastered it. So the pacing is different. We may also go more in depth. They may get to go broader and deeper and learn more about a topic because they might be learning it faster, or they might have more time to do it while the teacher is differentiating for the general education students. So it's a little different than what it is in a regular classroom, but we definitely are doing a lot of the same things. All of the students are still doing reading workshop. They're all doing writing workshop. They're all using the Eureka Squared program. but it is a little bit different than it is for the general education students. All right, so Indiana defines high ability as a student two different ways. It says it's a student who performs at or shows the potential for performing at an outstanding level of accomplishment in at least one domain area when they're comparing to students of the same age, experience, and environment. And that's really important for CogAT, because when we are looking at our results after the testing is completed, we are comparing students who we're using local norms to compare our students. So we're looking at students who go to the same school, who are in the same school district in grade 2 or in grade 5. We're not comparing our grade 2 students to students who attend school in Chicago or students who are attending school in New York. Those students have different experiences, different schema, different background knowledge. And so we want to make sure that we're using local norms when we're looking at our students and deciding which of these students are our highest performers. So we do use our local norms. So we're comparing other students of the same age, experience, and environment. And then the second part of this definition from the Department of Education is a student is characterized by exceptional gifts, talents, motivation, or interest. And so that really helps us to determine how we're differentiating in the classrooms by using our content, process, or product. High ability programming in Washington Township takes a couple of different forms. In grades K through 2, the students are matched with classroom experiences that will support their ongoing cognitive needs. And this could include grouping like-minded students who have been identified as high ability, and it might include enrichment or extension opportunities. In grades 3 and 5, we're identifying two different ways. They're either assigned in small groups with high-performing peers within the general education classroom, and they receive differentiated instruction. This model is known as the school-wide cluster grouping model. And we have a cluster grouping model in every elementary school here in Washington Township. It's something that we have worked really hard to implement and to educate our educators so that they understand how the programming looks different for a high ability student versus a general education student. So that's something we're really proud of, and that we're able to offer a high ability program to all of our students, no matter which school that you attend for your home school. We also have a model at Fox Hill, and this is for the students who are performing above the 96th percentile in achievement and aptitude tests. Your aptitude test is your CogAT. Your achievement tests are things like NWEA, I Learn, I Read, things like that. These students are participating in a self-contained high ability program, and it is located at Fox Hill Elementary School. So two different models that we have for either our cluster model or a self-contained model. Both of those start in grades 3, 4, and 5. We are not ignoring our grades K, 1, and 2 students. We keep track of which students have identified as having high potential learners, and we want to make sure that we are still servicing their needs within the classroom as well. We also have a dual language classroom, which has high ability students in it. And so we're taking a look at that model, making sure that we're meeting the needs, even if they're in a dual language program and they're high ability, they can be both and still receive services here in Washington Township. Okay, so you may be wondering, once they take the test, what happens next? So this is an example of a chart that you will get in the mail on your student, telling you how they performed on the CogAT. And you're going to see the battery of tests down here, which shows you the verbal, the quantitative, and the nonverbal. And then there is a composite score, which is a percentile that averages all of the 3 batteries together. So for example, this student, you can see that their scores are right here. They got a 108 on verbal, a 96 on quantitative, a 94 on nonverbal, and a 99 overall for their composite. This is showing us the stay-9 that they are in. We'll talk some more about stay-9s here in a moment. And this shows you the age percentile rank. Now, we look at the percentile rank when we are determining placement for high ability programming here in Washington Township. And we really want it to be in the high 90s. So you can see this student has a 66, a 35, a 31, and a 44 overall. This is an example of a student who would not qualify for high ability programming in Washington Township. And you can see over here where it's comparing them to other students. So we'll take a little bit closer look at that graph here. So in yellow is this graph that we were just looking at. This is how your child performed compared to other students in the same age group. So the same grade, the same school district. We're not comparing them to students who live in another part of the country. It's here locally. How did they perform against their peers here in Washington Township? So if you see that they have a 66, and this is this part of the graph, they did better than 66% of other students. They did better than 35% of other students, better than 31% of students, and so on. So we really want the graph to be over here in the high 90s in order to have a high ability placement. And then here are your stay-9s again. So the child before had stay-9s that were 4s, 5s, and 6s. And you can see 4, 5s, and 6s are right here, putting them at the average age for taking the test. And we are really looking at the very high and a few above average for our self-contained cluster groupings. Here's another representation, another visual to show you so that you can understand percentile ranks. So if they have a 50, they're right here in the middle where this bell curve is. And this is where your average person is. This is where most people are. Oops, let me go back. This is where most people are performing. Most of the students in Washington Township are going to be between the 40 and the 60. And then you'll start to go out a little bit. We are really looking at only the students up here, 95 and above. Those students that are in the green that are at the very highest ends of the bell curve, the highest ends of the percentile rate. Those are your gifted kids. Most kids are not going to be up there, but some of our students are. And those are the ones that we need to have our special programming for because they think a little bit differently. Their brains work differently. They learn faster. And so that's why we have our high ability programming for those students. Here are some upcoming dates. Again, we are testing all kindergarten, second grade, and fifth grade students in the Metropolitan School District of Washington Township during the month of November. So from the 1st to the 30th. I believe kindergarten is starting this week on the 9th and the 10th. And then the following week, we will start assessing grades 2 and 5. They will be doing some practice work in the classroom to get them ready for the test so that they understand the types of questions they will be asked so that it's not something that's brand new to them the day of testing. Then we will open the registration window for anybody that's in grades 3 and 4, who maybe they're new to the district and they missed the testing last year, or you just want to see if they have improved from the previous time they took the CogAT. That registration window will be from November 28th to the 2nd. And I encourage you to reach out to your building assistant principal in order to set up a time and a date for testing for those students in grades 3 and 4. Then we will start the CogAT testing for those particular grades from December 5th to the 16th. We are anticipating being able to send home testing results before winter break. So that is our goal, to get you all of the results from the CogAT testing and assessment before winter break. And then you will find out whether or not they have been identified at that time. And if you would like to appeal that process, you have until March 21st to the 1st in order to request an appeal for your student. And at that point, we will look at some more data points and make a new determination if we think that they might be able to be placed into the high ability program. All 2nd and 5th grade students can appeal who did not qualify. All right, so questions and reflections. I encourage you to reach out to me if you have any questions. Again, my name is Michelle Smelser and my email is here on the screen. I also have my phone number listed. If you would like to call me and talk to me in person, I'm more than happy to do that. My boss is also available to speak to anyone. Her name is Dr. Erica Buchanan Rivera, and you are more than welcome to send her an email or give her a call at the district as well. And we look forward to working with you and seeing your students in our program. Thanks and have a good evening.